Hi everyone, and welcome to module number 10. Hard to believe. So, this one we're going to be analyzing music with borrowed chords and the Neapolitan. So before we were just analyzing things that were kind of like four-part chorales. In this one we're going to be looking at two examples, and then in your assignment you're going to be looking at some other examples of real music as well, looking for the harmonies that we have talked about for the past couple weeks. So for this, we're just going to be, after watching this, we'll be able to understand how to identify borrowed chords and the Neapolitan in a piece of music. Both of these examples are also in the workbook. So if you can't see the score very clearly here, you could also follow along in the workbook. But the first one in that chapter is the Brahms Symphony No. 3, the second movement. So let's give this a listen. And so this will start, when I press play, the first measure that will show up on the left-hand side we actually won't be hearing. It'll be starting in the second measure, okay? So actually, I'll press play and then I'll kind of note where we're starting. So I'll make a little notation here. So we're starting in this second measure here, okay? And you can see, if I move my mouse, hopefully, it's an orchestra score. And so there are a couple things about it. All the instruments are here. It's sort of, everything's kind of small, right? And then you'll notice that the clarinet, if you look at the third line down, it's clarinet in German there. It's in a different key because that instrument is usually written in a different key than the other instruments. Then if you look two more lines down, you'll see that there's an alto clef, and believe it or not, that's not the viola. That's actually going to be a trombone. So it's sort of an old-fashioned way of writing trombone music. So you'll see that that's alto clef right there. And then, of course, you'll see the viola also has alto clef in the middle of the second group of instruments down there at the bottom. Okay, so it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I'll walk you through this. It's really not too bad. So let's give this a listen, and then we'll listen one more time. So we're just starting in that second measure there. Let's listen one more time. Now, your best tools in analysis, of course, are your ears, right? So we always want to be listening for what's happening in the music rather than looking at what's happening in the music. Because if you ever have any questions about your analysis, those will be answered by the way that you hear it, right? So the most important thing you can do when analyzing a piece of music is listen to it. So we want to be listening for, I think, where it feels like the harmonies are at rest, right? Like what are the tonic harmonies? Where it sounds like there are chromatic harmonies, things that are outside of the key, right? Any kind of repetitions, right? Do things seem to have the same structure but maybe a little bit of a variation when they're repeated? Are there things that sound like arpeggios that outline chords, right? So these are the kinds of things we want to be listening to. So I'll play this one more time, then we'll look at the score a little closer. Okay, so we've listened a couple times, and I think we can all sort of hear that this leads up to one big final cadence. This is the end of the second movement. at that last measure there. So here's the score a little bit clearer. And you can see that the last chord there, and whenever I look at a score, I usually try to find the lowest note, because in this kind of music, the harmony is often defined most apparently by the lowest note that we hear, right? And so that means you need to find the instruments that sound the lowest. And in an orchestral score, the lowest sounding instruments will be the double bass, right? That's the lowest sound we're going to hear. Maybe the cello. And then, of course, you also have to consider what instruments are most prominent, right? And so a trombone, there are only 3 trombones in this. There are probably about 6, maybe 8 basses. I'd say probably 6 basses, right? These 3 trombones can easily drown out those basses, right? An entire bass section. So we're really going to be hearing the brass instruments most prominently. So, you know, that's what we hear in the foreground of this orchestra. So everything else is kind of supporting them too. So you also want to consider that we'll be hearing the bass notes of the trombone as the most prominent. True. So this is our bass trombone here, the one I just circled. So that's kind of the foundation of our harmony here. So if we look at this last chord, I don't even really have to look at the other notes in the chord, but I see that the lowest note is a C. And I remember from hearing it that it sounded, of course, like this was a cadence, right? It sounded like it came to rest on this chord. So we could, even without knowing the key, which of course has no sharps, no flats, I think we could definitely say that this whole passage, right, cadences on the harmony C. So that means C is our tonic. So when we do our analysis, our Roman numeral analysis, we will use the Roman numeral 1 to represent C, right? So let's go ahead and put that in here. I'm going to write it in the middle. Normally we write our Roman numerals at the bottom, but this is our tonic here, and that's right in the middle of the score. So we're going to end on 1. So this is all leading us back to this C major harmony, which is the 1 of this passage. Okay? Now let's look at the beginning, and you see that we have a clarinet that looks like it's on the note D, right? And then bassoon down here, it looks like an E and a G. And I'm going to say, since I know a little bit about this piece, this bassoon is actually kind of the end of the phrase before. So we're not really going to worry about that bassoon too much. It does have a G in the bass, and technically that is the lowest note that we hear. But I think it's a little bit hard to hear that G. So I don't know if I would use that G to really analyze this. Plus, it's part of the other phrase. So I'm not going to worry too much about what that bassoon is, right? I'm going to worry about everything else I see, though. So this clarinet looks like it's a D, right? And if you look down here with the violins, they're also sustaining a note, but it's a C. And you might be wondering, well, that didn't sound like a whole step, right? It wasn't dissonant. And that's because this clarinet, like I said, is not in the key of D, right? It's actually in the key of C. So that D there, we have to transpose that down so it's the note that sounds rather than the note that's written. So really that whole note D is not a D, it's a C. So really it's just a unison with the strings there. So we know that we have a C here. Okay, so we start with the C being sustained, and then underneath of it happens this little chord change. And if we look at the bass notes, we have a C here, an F, and then a C, and then another F. And if we look at the cello and the bass, we have the same thing, a C, an F, a C, and an F. So it's the same thing, it's a little bit different octave, but I think we hear the bass line overall as C up to F, down to C, down to F, okay? And so that kind of sounds like maybe a 1-4-1-4 progression. And so let's see if that matches what's in the harmony there. And it looks like the only harmony that's really happening is in the trombones. So we have a chord with C as the bass, and then if we look at these 2 notes, they're an alto clef, and the lowest note's an E, highest note's a G. So we have a chord that's C, E, G, and then if we look at our horn, which is also in the key, it's not transposed, it's in the key of C, those are just straight Cs as well. So we have a chord that is C, E, G, C. So that's definitely a C major triad. So that's going to be our one chord. Then we have our note F, right? And then in our trombone, we have an F and an A in alto clef. Then another C. So the chord that has F, F, A, and C, of course, is an F major triad. So that's a 4 chord. And then we go back to the original chord. And then we go back to our 4 chord. So we have kind of this plagal progression. It's almost like an amen at the end of a hymn, right? And so we have the sustained note C held over a little sort of 4-note plagal progression that sort of goes back and forth between the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 1 chord, and then finally ends on the 4 chord. Okay? So I think the Roman numerals you'd use for this would be 1, 4, 1, and then 4 again. Up here, in the next measure, we have the clarinet, and the clarinet arpeggiates a chord, and you can see that it looks like a G major triad, right? But remember, this is all transposed, so you have to think of that as down a step. So this is actually sounding like an F major triad. So that is a 4 chord. So the 4 chord lasts for this entire measure while the clarinet is arpeggiating that. Okay? So this 4 will last for this entire measure here. Now in this next chord, or next measure, which is measure 3, again we have C sustained in the violins, and looks like C comes in on the oboe. And the clarinet will end on a D, but that's really sounding as a C. So again, we have a C again. And so technically no chord there, but if you look at the next harmony, we have sort of a similar pattern, but slightly different thing going on in the trombone. So now we have a C in the bass trombone, an A flat in the bass trombone, C again, A flat again. Okay? And if you compare that to what happened before, that's pretty similar rhythm, right? So maybe we have something that's like a repetition of what happened before, but with a slight variation. And the slight variation is that the chord that the C goes to, that it alternates with, is different. Okay? So let's look at this first chord. And so we have a C in the bass trombone, an E and a G again in the tenor trombone. This time, the horn is higher. We have a C and a G again. The bassoon comes in with a C and an E, and then the clarinet has F sharp and A, which we know is E and G. And then the oboe, like I said, is sustaining that C. So this whole thing is a C major triad again. So this is a 1. Now this chord here is different. We have an A flat in the bass. We have an E flat in our tenor trombone. And we have a C in the first trombone. Here we have a C and an A flat on the horn. Here we have an A flat and an E flat in the bassoon. We have an F natural and a B flat in the clarinet. And of course, you know F natural is actually sounding as E flat. And we have a C again. So overall, this chord is A flat. There's a C in there too. And there's also an E flat. Okay, that doesn't exist in the key of C, right? So this is a chromatic chord. And so what is it then? So if it has a root of an A flat, because this looks like an A flat major triad, right? That root of A flat is the flat 6 of the key. So now we're alternating not between 1, 4, 1, 4, but 1, flat 6, then back to 1, and then ending on, looks like another flat 6. So even in this short little excerpt, he's setting up an expectation of starting on one chord, going to another chord, going back to that first chord, going to another chord, right? Then it's kind of the subsequent phrase, right? The second iteration of this, we have something similar starting on one chord, alternating with another chord, but this time the chord is varied, right? And so we're given the flat 6 instead of the 4. And then back to the 1, and then back to the flat 6. Okay? And then you can see the oboe up here in measure 4. It arpeggiates the A flat major triad. Then our flute comes in on a C, which is the third of that A flat major triad. Okay? So I'd say this A flat major triad, this flat 6, which I wrote as a flat 4. that's not right. This flat 6, dyslexia strikes again. Flat 6 lasts for this entire measure. Okay. Then, we've been given a harmonic area of 1, of 4, now flat 6, and now as kind of a sense of completion of this whole thing, right, or a way of rounding it out, Brahms is kind of combining the two ideas, right? So we've had a 1, a 4, a chromatic chord, flat 6, and in this harmony here, let's see what it is. So we have an F in the bass, an A flat in the tenor trombone, a C in the first trombone, a C in the horn, an F in the bassoon, another F in the bassoon, a G in our clarinet, which we know sounds like an F, a B flat in our clarinet, which we know sounds like an A flat, and then of course we have our winds arpeggiating that as well. So our bass note is definitely an F based on what I've seen here. And so our chord here is F, A flat, and C. And that normally, right, if it were F, A natural, C, would be a 4 chord, but this is actually a borrowed harmony, the minor 4 chord. Okay, so we've had 4 introduced, right? We've had flat 6 introduced, and now we kind of have something that is sort of a combination of the two, a minor 4, right? So the harmony for this measure is minor 4. All right, and then the winds arpeggiate that F minor triad, A flat F, A flat C, F, A flat, and then finally in this chord we have what looks like we have C's in the violin, a C in the trombone, a G in the trombone, an E in the trombone, a C in the horn, C in the bassoon, F sharp and A in the clarinets, which of course are actually E and G, and then E and G in the oboe, and then it looks like E and G in the flute. So of course this is a C major triad, okay, which then gets reinforced in this next measure here. And this, I think these last two measures are just an extension of the cadence to make it really sound like this is the end of the piece. Okay, so that's our Roman numeral analysis. Now, of course, Roman numeral analysis is only, I'd say, at most 50% of the actual analysis, right? But it is a good start. It gives you an idea of where the harmonies are. The true analysis is in discovering how those harmonies are used, right? And that's kind of what I was talking about before, where we were saying that we first have this alternating set of chords, 1, 4, 1, 4, then a variation of that alternating set of chords, 1, flat 6, 1, flat 6, and then the two ideas, right, of borrowed chords and 4 chords coming together to go as this minor 4 chord, and then of course a cadence which resolves all of the tension that we built up on 1. Now, if you were asked what kind of cadence this is, it might be kind of a tough question because we don't really know what a minor 4-1 cadence is, right? But we do know what a 4-1 cadence is. So really, you could call this a plagal cadence, but you might call it a minor plagal cadence. Okay, so a minor 4 going to 1. So the cadence, I'd say if you had to identify it, would be a minor plagal cadence. Okay, let's listen to this one more time with this analysis in mind and try to listen for what we talked about. Moment. Now, let's look at our next one. It will be a little bit more straightforward because it is a clarinet concerto, but it's written out for piano and clarinet. So this is only 3 lines instead of the 30 lines we just looked at. Okay, so this is the Louis Spohr first clarinet concerto, just Opus 26, the first movement. Now in this one, I'll tell you where we're starting as well. So we're actually going to start not at the top there, but we're going to be starting down here where the clarinet comes in. So you'll hear, I think, the end of this measure before, but then we're going to be starting right here and going to the end. Okay? Let's listen to that one more time. And again, the mark of where we're starting is still there. That. Now, weirdly, the clarinet is not transposed in this case. It is actually written in the key of well, we call it in C, right? But it matches the key that's in the piano. So let's dive into this. Now, of course, from hearing that, and remember hearing is the most important tool in analysis, right? I would say this whole thing is like one big phrase. Well, I guess there's different ways to hear it. Yeah, you have a couple phrases. I guess, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. We could say that this is a phrase, right? This is another phrase. But none of these really feel like the end of the harmonic tension, right? I don't think we really get to the end of where things feel like the tension is released until the very end here, until we get to the C minor chord here, right? So again, C minor is the tonic of this. So we'll put 1 in here. Now, if we look at these chords leading up to that, right, we're going to say that this is a cadence. We have a G in the bass. Looks like a C minor triad on the right hand of the piano, right? And so whenever you have a G in the bass with a C minor, right, this to me looks like a 1, 6, 4 chords. This is a cadential 6, 4. Now, of course, we know what to expect after that, and let's see if we get it. So we should have a 5 after a 1, 6, 4 chord. And so it looks like we do. So we have a G in the bass, and then a G, a D, and an F natural in the piano. So we're missing that third, but you can see that it actually happens right there in the clarinet. And so this is a thing to keep in mind too. You're going to be looking at sort of the holistic view of this piece, right? So not just what happens in any given moment of the piece, but what happens over maybe 2 beats, or what happens maybe even over a measure, right? And so in these 2 beats, we're given the complete chord. They just don't happen at the same time because this is a different texture than a 4-part chorale, right? And so that B natural happens in the clarinet because we're saving, right? That B natural is the most tension in the chord. So we're saving that note to give us like the maximum amount of tension until the very last possible moment. So we're not given the leading tone until the last beat of the measure. And so together, this is a 5-7 chord. So we have a 1, 6, 4, a 5, 7, and then a 1. All right. So that's how this ends. Now let's look at the very beginning. So it starts on a piano, right? It looks like we have a C in the bass, G, C, E in the right hand of the piano, and then a G in our clarinet. So it looks like in this first bar, we have a 1 chord. And so it looks like I was writing in the middle, so I'll keep doing that. So a 1 chord to start with. Now, of course, we have sort of an anomalous note here with the B natural and the clarinet. But remember, this is a different texture. You can have things like non-chord tones, right? Notes that do not belong in the overall harmony, right? As long as they're resolved correctly. And in fact, this is. So this is sort of a escape tone. Yeah, no, appoggiatura, leap, and then a step up, right? So we have a leap to a B natural. And so this B natural is an appoggiatura because we're leaping down to it and then stepping up to resolve it. So that is not a note that should be analyzed in this chord, right? But the G and C are fine. So this is a 1 chord for this measure. This next one over here looks like we have a C in the bass still. Our piano notes move up to an A flat, a D, and an F. And then we have an E flat and a D in the clarinet. So before, our piano was giving us the overall harmony, so maybe that's the case here too. So if we were to analyze this, it looks like we'd have a C, a D, an F, and an A flat, which is not in root position, right? But if we rearrange this, we'd have D, F, A flat, C, which is a 2 chord, right? So D minor, it's actually a D flat 5 chord, right? Because it has an A flat on it, so it's half diminished. So this is a 2 half diminished chord. And it's a 7 chord, but it has the 7th in the bass, so it is a 4-2 chord. So 2 half diminished, 4-2. Now, of course, that means that one of these notes doesn't belong. The D matches what's in the piano, right? So that's fine. But this E flat doesn't quite match. And again, I think it's an appoggiatura, a leap, and then a step down. So that E flat we can account for as an appoggiatura. Okay. In this next chord, we have a B natural in the bass, an A flat, a D, and an F. So if I wrote that all out, I'd have B natural, D, F, A flat, which looks like a fully diminished 7th chord, right, in the key of C. So this is actually our 7, fully diminished 7, right? Now, of course, in the clarinet, A flat belongs, that's fine. The C sharp does not belong, so we are we're continuing our pattern of leaping to an appoggiatura and resolving up by step in the melody. Okay, and that D, of course, does belong. All right, now on this, we would expect this to be followed by a tonic chord, but that's not actually what happens. And so if we look at this next harmony, we have a B flat, a D flat, an E natural, and a G. So we have B flat, D flat, B flat, D flat, E natural, and G. Also not in root position again. So if we rearrange this, we'd have an E natural, a G, a B flat, sorry, and a D flat. So again, it's a fully diminished 7th chord, but we don't really know how this works because we shouldn't have an E natural in this key. We definitely shouldn't have a D flat in this key. So we're not really sure what this is. So whenever you don't know what a chord is, it's always good to look at the next chord because everything in this system of music, right, is functional, which means it has some role to play, and often that role is to connect to the next chord, right? And so let's look at this next chord. So we have an A flat on the bass, which is just a octave here. Then we have an F and a C in the clarinet, and then it looks like it changes in B2 here. So this chord is A flat C F, which is a first inversion F minor chord. So that is actually the 4 chord of this. So we can analyze this as a 4-6, which I think it is. Now, if we back up and look at the chord that we couldn't figure out, it looks like it has the leading tone of F minor, doesn't it? Which is E natural. So I think the right analysis for this chord is a chord that connects to F minor, So this is going to be a secondary leading tone chord. So the leading tone chord of F minor would be an E natural, E fully diminished seventh chord, right? So we could analyze this as a 7 fully diminished 7 of, let me erase the chord here, 7 fully diminished 7 of what's coming next, which is the 4 chord. All right, so then we have our 4 chord. Over here, it looks like we have, maybe this is a 5, right? So we have a C, an E natural, and a G with a B flat on the bass. So a good analysis for this might be 5, 4, 2. Oh, I take that back. I'm sorry. I was thinking a different key. I was thinking in the key of F, actually. Sorry. Yeah, that's not right. So that E natural there, right, is still the leading tone. So it is a 5, 4, 2, but it's not a 5, 4, 2 of the key of C. It's a 5, 4, 2 of the key of 4. So it's like we're spending a lot more time in the 4 chord than we normally would be, right? So that's a 5, 4, 2 of 4, going back to a 4. Okay. Then we have sort of a mystery note, a G flat chord with an A flat, a C, and an E flat in the top. So I don't really know what that is yet. So I'm going to mark that as a question mark. Then in our next harmony, we have an F, an A flat, and a D flat. So you might not know what that is either, but D flat, right? That's the flat 2 of the key, right? So the flat 2, the lowered second degree of C minor. And one of the chords we learned about, of course, was the Neapolitan, which has that as its quote-unquote root, right? And so is this a Neapolitan 6? Well, there's only one way to find out, which is to analyze it. And so we would expect that the third of the chord would be in the bass, which it is. So we have an F, an A flat, and a D flat. And if we rearrange that, we have a D flat major chord, which is in fact the Neapolitan. So this little section here cadences on a Neapolitan harmony. We have our N6 there. All right. So again, we didn't know what that chord with a G flat in the bass is. So let's see if that connects somehow to the Neapolitan 6. And remember that the root, right, the sort of apparent root of this chord is a D flat. And so if we think about the circle of fifths, right, the 5 of the D flat, right, if we think 5 notes up from D flat, would be an A flat chord. And we could even make that a 7, right? So this could be an A flat 7, which would lead to a 1, right? In this case, D flat, which is also the N6 in the larger context of the key, right? So we could say that this A flat 7, if we're thinking about it this way, is really the 5-7 of Neapolitan 6, right? And so let's look at what's in our example. We have a G flat in the bass and an A flat major chord in the right hand. So that kind of looks like maybe an A flat 4-2 chord, right? So because the 7th of A flat is G flat. So I think what we have here is a 5-4-2, so the 7th is in the bass, of a Neapolitan 6. And then we have our Neapolitan 6 after that, which is a kind of cool transition. And you can see it also happens because of the voice leading, right? We just step down by a whole step to create that G flat, right? All the other voices sort of move except for the middle note, that C, right, which sustains. The A flat technically is sustained 2 in the chord, right? So we have all this voice leading, which leads us to this really nice moment of 5-4-2 of Neapolitan 6. So it's kind of like a secondary dominant of a Neapolitan, which is a nice little thing. Okay, now we have this little flourish in the clarinet. It's sort of like a mini cadenza moment at the very beginning of the piece, right? And it all kind of surrounds the Neapolitan harmony, right? So we have things that are A flats, D flats, Fs, right? All the other notes are sort of surrounding those two parts of the chord, right? So I don't think it's worth really looking into what this is, but we could just say it's all kind of an outline of a Neapolitan 6. All right. Now down here we get the leading tone B again, but this time we have an F, an A flat, a B, a D, and a B natural. So again, I think this is our 7. And it has an F in the bass, which is the 5th of the chord. So this is like a 7 fully diminished 4/3 chord. Okay. Then we're given something a little bit strange, which is F sharp A, C, E flat, C. Okay. That F sharp doesn't really belong in our key. So that's something that should be looked into. And again, if you don't know the chord, look at the next one, right? So this is a 1/6/4, which kind of has a extension of the 5 chord a little bit, right? It has a lot of the same notes as the 5. And so often you can use like a secondary harmony to get to that 1/6/4, and that secondary harmony can be the secondary harmony of the 5 chord. So with that in mind, if we analyze this, we could look at it as an F sharp, an A, a C, and an E flat, which is the leading tone chord. So 7 fully diminished 7 of 5, which leads to a 1/6/4, since 1/6/4 has a dominant function. Okay, so that's the Roman numeral analysis for this. And again, that gets you about halfway to a true analysis of this, right? And you want to look at, of course, the melody, which we did. You have this expectation of things that are leaping to non-chord tones, right? And then stepping up, so the idea of an appoggiatura. And then we have these other harmonies, right, that are sort of cadencing, right, using secondary harmonies to get to a more stable harmony, but then spending more time in that area, right? So like here we have our minor 4, and we don't go immediately to our back to our 4 chord, right? Instead we go, or to our tonic chord. Instead we go to sort of it's a secondary function of 4, right? So we're spending a little bit more time in the 4 area than we should. And I think that also kind of creates some kind of connection with getting to our N6 through a secondary chord too. And then of course down here, instead of going from our 7 to a 1, right, we go 7 to a secondary chord of the 5, right? So there's some kind of connection, I think, and I didn't really look into this, but some kind of connection between, the idea of a secondary dominant kind of extending that harmonic area, and the use of getting to that Neapolitan 6 through a secondary dominant as well. Okay, well great. It's just, how much can you really pick apart, 12 bars of music? That's music theory for you. Okay, let's listen to this one more time, just with that in mind. So I'll erase all this, but we're listening for those harmonies I just pointed out, the appoggiaturas in the melody, right? That secondary dominant leading to the Neapolitan 6th, and of course the little areas where we seem to get to a stable harmonic area, but then we get the secondary dominant of that harmonic area, which extends that harmonic area more than it would be. So one more listen to this. So again, you could spend hours on 12 bars if you really wanted to. But like I said, the Roman numeral analysis is maybe 50% of the actual analysis, right? And we're doing it because it's a good place to start. But we want to start thinking about the connections in the structure of the music and why those particular chords were chosen, right? And the Roman numeral analysis tells you what the relationships are between the chords, so you can start to make those connections, right? So that's really what we want to be thinking about with our analysis. Okay, if you have any questions, we'll be going over another example in the next Zoom session. And of course, you'll be doing this on the homework too. All right. Well, thanks for watching and have a great day.